Good evening. Good evening. Freedom, endowed by our Creator, defined by our Constitution, and defended each and every day by the men and women who proudly wear the uniform of these United States. Tonight, as we talk about freedom and faith, we should begin by thanking God for the freedoms that were endowed on us in this country. We should remember the founders who helped identify those in that document, the Constitution, for which we focus on. And we should begin in particular tonight by thanking any men or women here who are in the service to our country, be they on active duty, the Guard or Reserve, or those who have served our country in the past as veterans. With any of you here tonight who fit that category, please stand so we can recognize you. And as you go home tonight, and before you go to bed, when you say your prayers, I'd ask that you not only thank in your prayers the good Lord for the men and women that just stood up, but remember that even as we speak here tonight, there are men and women in harm's way. And there will be into the foreseeable future, whether they come from the active duty, the Guard, Reserve, anywhere around the country. So don't forget them. As we talk about freedom, we need to remember the people who have stood and continue to stand to protect those freedoms each and every day. On June 5th of 2012, as Kane mentioned, we won the one and only recall election ever for a gubernatorial race in this entire country. Many of you here helped us out, and we appreciate it. There are a lot of folks who went across the Mississippi and knocked on doors in our state. There are a lot of folks who said, even here, I'll get on the phone and make phone calls to get out the grassroots in your state. There are many of you that send in checks for $25 or $30 or $40. We appreciate every bit of that. But most importantly, there's so many of you here and others from across this great country who said to Tonette and I, we're praying for you. And I just want to tell you how much that meant to us, particularly at the height of not just the recall, but when we had 100,000 protesters in and around our capital, when we had death threats against myself and my family and others out there, I got to tell you, what sustained us through that all were people all along the way who would tell us, we're praying for you, we're praying for Tonette, we're praying for your boys, we're praying for your lawmakers. Thank you for that. The only thing I'd ask in return is don't stop praying. We still need your prayers. We appreciate it very much. A couple days after that recall election, I want to tell you an interesting story today. A couple days after that recall election, I got an email from a longtime friend of mine. It's an odd email. He said, I took a picture of this devotional, and I was going to send it to you on the day of the election if you'd lost. He said, because it's really a powerful devotional. It's powerful for someone who's in a time of mourning, a time of crisis, a time of loss. And he said, I didn't, but then I waited a couple days, and he said, I don't know what moved me, but I decided to send it to you anyway. And so as I read his email, I opened up the attachment, and I read it, and it really would have been powerful had I lost the election. And as I looked at it more closely, I realized the typeface was familiar to me. And I went over and I got out a copy of a devotional that Tonette and I read each day called Jesus Calling. And I looked at it, and lo and behold, it was from that devotional. And what was interesting to me, it was for Monday, June 4th. As you can imagine, the day before election, I'd gotten up early. I was doing interviews. I was getting ready for the bus. And somehow that day, I neglected to read the devotional. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Boy, that would have really been powerful had I lost the election. I'm glad I didn't, Lord. But I realize now it's kind of interesting to see that I missed it. I didn't think anything more of it. And a couple days more went by. And then in my official office, I got an email there from a woman who lived in northern Wisconsin who wanted to tell me about her brother Pat. Her brother Pat had been at a breakfast on the farm I had been on the Sunday before that recall election. And in Wisconsin, we love to do a dairy breakfast at all of our dairy farms in different counties around the state. And that particular Sunday, I had been in Brokaw in north central Wisconsin. And this email told me about how this woman's brother and his family had been at that breakfast, and he was a big fan of mine. He heard I was over there flipping pancakes and serving them up for folks, and so he and his family came up, and they were one of the many people who'd gotten in line to take a picture. And this email went on to say about how excited he was, not just for that picture, but because he had told his family, he had a 13-year-old son and his wife, and then two children who are a little bit older in their 20s, and how he said how important it was that they get out that Tuesday to vote, how important it was the good work we had done in the state of Wisconsin, and that recall not be successful. And then I read the email a little bit further, and it said the next morning that Pat got up to milk his cows early in the morning, was a 13-year-old. And at the age of 52, he dropped over dead of a heart attack. And then this email went on to tell me about how Pat's wife and her 2 adult children, even though it was the day after the passing of her husband and their father, still went out to vote on that Tuesday because they knew how passionately Pat was interested in that election. And as the sister of that man, Pat, she wanted me to know that and ask if I'd send a note to her sister-in-law to tell her I'd acknowledged hearing this story and sent, not greetings, but sympathies on behalf of Tonette and I. And as you can imagine, I didn't do that. I got my staff to find the telephone number so I could call over to the farm and talk to Pat's wife. And I got on the phone, called over there. One of the daughters, who was in her 20s, answered the phone. They went out to the barn where she was still trying to figure out how to run all that equipment a few days after her husband had passed away, and how she was going to milk all those cows. And she came in to take the call. And I talked about how her sister-in-law had sent me this email and told me this story, and she affirmed what was said in the email. And as we were talking, suddenly it hit me. It hit me as we were talking about what she had gone through, that her husband had died on Monday, June 4th. And it dawned on me, that devotional wasn't for me. And so I walked over, and I got out Jesus Calling, and I looked at June 4th. And on June 4th it said, "Welcome challenging times as opportunities to trust me. You have me beside you and my spirit within you. So no set of circumstances is too much for you to handle. When the path before you is dotted with difficulties, beware of measuring your strength against those challenges. That calculation is certain to riddle you with anxiety. Without me, you won't make it past the first hurdle. The way to walk through demanding days is to grip my hand tightly and stay in close communication with me. Let your thoughts and spoken words be richly flavored with trust and thankfulness. Regardless of the day's problems, I can keep you in perfect peace as you stay close to me." Made me realize at that moment that the best way to minister is to accept God's callings at the time when you least expect it. For Tonette and I, it was back in 2009 when we were looking at our state at the time. We looked at all the troubles that were facing the state of Wisconsin back then, and we realized as parents that for Matt and for Alex, our 2 sons, it was completely unacceptable to think that they would grow up in a state that wasn't as great as the state that we had grown up in. And even though we knew the election would be tough, because in our state a Republican hadn't won for president since 1984, back when I was in high school and I still had a full head of hair. And we knew it would be tough, but we got in that race. We won that election, and early on, 4 years ago at this time in 2011, we had to make some pretty tough decisions. Some decisions that brought an awful lot of protesters in from around the country. But I get to tell you, what sustained us was not only the prayers I mentioned before, but the fact that we felt in making that decision, we didn't just talk about it and think about it, we prayed about it. We felt it was a calling for us to get in that election. And we knew along the way it didn't matter about the title or the position. We felt we were called to do the right thing. And so we worried more about the next generation than we did about the next election. And I know that's true for many of you here, not just for those who are interested in politics, but in life. It's about accepting that calling no matter what it might be. Whether you started a business, whether you're in the clergy, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a farmer, whether anywhere else, it's about accepting that calling. And I'm glad we did with what we did in Wisconsin, because today, some 4 years later, our state is better because of that. Not just economically. Heck, we took a state that had an unemployment rate of 9.2%. We turned it around to one that just last month was down to 4.6% unemployment. We took a state that was $3.6 billion in the hole. And each of the last 4 years, we've created a balanced budget. And over the next 2 years, we end with a surplus of nearly $500 million. Our pension fund is the only one in the country fully funded. Our debt and pension ratio is one of the lowest out there. Our rainy day fund's 165 times bigger than we took office. But it wasn't just about finances and the economy. I'm proud to say that because of our reforms today, there is no seniority or tenure in our state. That means we can hire and fire based on merit. We can pay based on performance. We can put the best and the brightest in our classrooms, and we can pay them to be there. And we didn't just provide opportunities that were improved in our traditional public schools. We expanded school choice statewide. We expanded the amount of opportunities in charter schools and virtual schools and homeschool environments, because we wanted to make sure that every child, every son and daughter in our state had the opportunity to have the best education possible and have their family be the ones who made the right choice going forward. It wasn't just in those areas either. Some of you may know this, others may not. In our first budget, we defunded Planned Parenthood in the state of Wisconsin. We made sure dollars for women's health went into the public health systems in the counties and other places where it was less controversial, and we passed major pro-life legislation in the state of Wisconsin as well. On top of that, we passed Castle Doctrine and concealed carry so that every law-abiding citizen in our state has the right to protect themselves, their family, their loved ones, and their property. And we passed concealed carry. We passed on top of that, not only all those things, we actually passed photo ID, so that in our state it's easy to vote but hard to cheat. Now, I tell you this all just for a couple reasons. One, well, not so much to brag, but is to tell you that if it can happen in a blue state like Wisconsin, it can happen anywhere across America, and more importantly, with the right leadership, it can happen in our nation's capital. We've got a new United States Senate with a Republican majority. We've got a House of Representatives with a Republican majority. If we send a Republican, conservative, reform-minded Republican into the White House in 2016, there's no doubt, just as we've done in state after state across America, we can make America great again with your help. And let me give you 3 quick examples of the contrast going forward as the night has grown long. And I want to get you on your way as well so you can get back home and get up early and go off to church here, as we're going to do tomorrow in Wauwatosa, where our home is. First off, we need to talk more about growth in this country. You know, the President and Hillary Clinton spent a lot of time talking about how to grow the economy, but they get mixed up. They think you grow the economy in Washington. I think we grow the economy in cities and towns and villages all across this great country, that one of the best ways to grow the economy is to get the government out of the way of the American people and American employers. That means not only lower taxes, but fixing the marriage penalty so we can support and embrace marriage and improve families in this country. By making a competitive tax burden for our employers and job creators to bring more jobs back from overseas, to put more of our fellow Americans back to work, to rein in the regulatory environment so that whether it's the EPA or others out there, we allow people and farmers and business owners and others to create jobs and wealth and opportunity in this country. It means getting rid of Obamacare and putting patients back in charge of their health care. It means even when we talk about the economy, it means actually having a rational policy when it comes to legal immigration in this country that starts with securing the border, enforcing E-Verify upon every employer in this country so we uphold the law, not having amnesty, saying if you want to be a citizen, you've got to go back to your country of origin and then get back in line like everybody else. And when it comes to legal... And when it comes to legal immigration, the economy should drive things, and the number one priority in that process going forward should be American workers and American wages. When times are tough, the last thing we want to do is flood the market to put more workers in at a time when workers are unemployed and wages are low. We need to make sure we put American workers first in everything we do, from immigration to tax policy to regulatory reform and on down the line. Secondly, we need to talk about not only growth, but reform. And reform, what I mean, simply put, is about transferring power out of Washington, like we did in our state, taking the power out of the big government special interest and putting it back in the hands of the people. I would take it from Washington and put it back into the states, from the special interest into the hands of the people. And that's true on whether it's Medicaid or transportation or education or other areas. Take the money and the responsibilities and send it back to the states and the local governments and the school districts, and most importantly, put it into the hands of the American people again. That's not only true on funding of state or national agencies, federal agencies, that's true on things like marriage. Marriage is a decision that should be defined by our state governments, not at the federal level. And in Wisconsin and other places across the country, marriage is defined between one man and one woman, and states should be the ones that make that decision. And when we talk about that, we should be standing up for religious freedoms. I'm proud to say in my state, it's actually in the state's constitution. And the last time I checked, it's in our nation's constitution as well. It's about religion. It's what our founders thought about in the 10 amendments, the 10 First Amendments in the Bill of Rights. We need to uphold the Constitution of the United States and protect the ability to practice religion regardless of whether you're Christian or Jewish or anywhere else. We shouldn't be picking winners and losers. We should say that's exactly why we founded this country, because our founders were tired of the oppression coming from other places around the world. In America, we should be the shining star that says you should be able to practice your religion, and the government should defend you in doing it every single time. And finally, in addition to growth and reform, the last thing I want to spend just a few minutes talking about is safety. I'd say safety. What does that mean? That sounds like fire and police protection. No, safety is what some people call national security. I call it safety. Because when I see the images of a Jordanian pilot burned alive in a cage, when I see Christians from Egypt and other places around the world beheaded, or of late not only beheaded, shot in execution style, when I see these images out there, I worry about the safety, not just of those individuals. If you think about it, I start to worry about safety of ourselves and our children and our coworkers and our neighbors, because it's not just in the Middle East. We see attacks in France and Belgium, Canada. It's not a matter of if an attempt is made on American soil again, it is when. And right now, I get so frustrated with this president because we've got a president who drew a line in the sand and allowed people to cross it. We've got a president who called ISIS the JV squad, who calls Yemen a success story, who calls Iran a place we can do business with. Think about that for a minute. Think about that for a minute. I grew up from third grade on in Delavan, Wisconsin. Now, a lot of you may not know this. My father was a preacher. He actually started out, first church was in Colorado Springs, where I was born. In 1970, we moved to Plainfield, Iowa, in northeastern Iowa, where we lived from 1970 to 1977. In fact, Chuck Grassley you heard from before. It's kind of funny. When we first moved there in 1970, he was our state representative. How about that? But I think about there, and then eventually growing up in Delavan, Wisconsin. I remember in the late 70s, I'm sure many of you do as well, tying yellow ribbons around the tree in front of our house. Why? Because for 444 days, Iran held Americans hostage. People like my friend Kevin Hermaning, a Marine from Wausau, Wisconsin. They have not changed much since then. A few of the leaders have changed, but their approach is just the same. We need to stand up and tell the President of the United States to back away from a bad deal because it's not in the interest of the American people. Now more than ever, I believe that Americans want a commander-in-chief who will stand up and tell it like it is, who will tell the American people that the biggest threat we face in the world today is radical Islamic terrorism, and we will do something about it. We need a leader in America today that will recognize that Israel is actually an ally and start treating them as such. And we need a leader in this country who will have the courage to look the American people in the eye and tell them this may not happen in a day or a week or a month or even a year. But as I mentioned before, it is not if an attempt is made on American soil, it is when an attempt is made. On behalf of my children and yours, I'd rather take the fight to them instead of waiting till the fight comes to us. We need a leader who's going to work to protect the American way of life and our children and grandchildren and yet generations yet to be born. And so I would just end where we started. I would just end with this quick note about freedom. You see, years ago, and this is why I'm optimistic about the future of this great country, as much as we face unbelievable challenges here and in the world today, I'm still an optimist because I believe in the American spirit and I know the history of this great country. As a kid growing up in Delavan, I loved history. In fact, I loved it so much I thought of our founders as bigger than life, superheroes. And yet, as a kid, we never had a chance to go to Philadelphia. And so later in life, when Tonette and I got a chance to go over to Philadelphia for a conference, we got up early in the morning. We went out to see the Liberty Bell. As the sun was coming up, we walked into Independence Hall. I was ready to be blown away. Ready to be blown away. Remember, I thought these people were like bigger than life. Unbelievable. And I walked in and I saw the desk. And I saw the chairs, and they're not much unlike the ones we sit in today. And it dawned on me. These were ordinary people. Ordinary people who did something quite extraordinary. These were people who didn't just risk their lives, that didn't just risk their political careers. They didn't just risk their business ventures. These were people who risked their lives for the freedoms we hold dear today. Ladies and gentlemen, here tonight, I would just remind you that what makes America great, what makes us exceptional, what makes us the greatest country in the history of the world has been all throughout our nation's history. In times of crisis, be it economic or fiscal, be it military or spiritual, what makes America amazing has been all throughout our nation's history. There have been men and women of courage who've been willing to think more about the future of their children and their grandchildren than they thought about their own futures. Ladies and gentlemen, this is one of those moments in American history. This is one of those times when we can look back and tell future generations, we were there. We accepted the call. We did what was necessary to make America great again. Ladies and gentlemen, with your help and support and prayers, we can do just that. God bless you for coming out. Thank you for being here tonight. Go forward. Thank you.